Welcome to this event as part of Ennis Bookclub Festival 2021. My name is Danny. I'm the Artistic Director of the programme, and this event this evening is with Kevin Barry. The event is free, but if you'd like to make a donation, you can through the donation page of our website. Kevin, you're very welcome.
Thanks, Danny. Thanks for having me.
Delighted to have you on, Kevin, and we're talking about your most recent short story collection, That Old Country Music. Really loved the collection, Kevin. Very, very nice work and loads in it to appreciate, really. My first question is about the white thorn. The image of the white thorn comes into the stories a lot. Why is that, or where did it come from?
Yeah, I think my most favourite time of year actually here in South County Sligo is May, when the white thorn is out, when the blossom is out, and it's just kind of decked all over the fields, and it's kind of eerie, almost spooky looking. But I guess like everywhere in Ireland, there's a lot of superstitious kind of belief going back forever and a day about the white thorn, that it's unlucky to bring it into the house and all that kind of a thing. And it's, folklorists have this thing called half belief, where people, they might not necessarily believe that fairies are dancing under the white thorn trees in the pale moonlight, but just in case, they won't knock the trees, they won't go near them. And you see in all the fields around here, like in the middle of a field, the only tree that would be there would be an old white thorn tree, because you're not going to take the chance of cutting it. Somebody kind of pointed out to me, I think there are 11 stories in the book, and I think the white thorns come into 8 of them or something. Yeah. So I was a bit sort of thrown by how much it's affected me, obviously, but it's it's just one of these little images that recurs throughout the stories.
Yeah, it's nice because you're right, it comes into a lot of the stories, and I kind of marked it as I went through the book. I stuck in stickers on different things, but everywhere I saw whitethorn, I put it in. And I know in one of the stories it directly references, like you're saying there, superstition, and it's kind of symbolic in that particular story of an omen, of maybe a kind of a bad omen. And I wonder, I suppose, like a lot of these stories, would it be fair to say they involve fantasists, like characters who tend to fantasize and along this kind of theme of love, or their idea of love?
Yeah, characters with rich interior lives, if we put it if we put it that way. Yeah, they're kind of a lovelorn kind of a bunch, all right. A lot of the characters, it just came out in the US last month, and some reviewer something described it as heartbroken people up in the hills, which I think kind of nailed it. Really, there's a lot of that going on. But yeah, it's just, I was kind of gathering up the stories that I'd written since the last collection, Dark Lies the Island, came out in 2012, which is a while ago. So I had about 20 or so stories lying around the house, kind of down the back of the couch. And I was gathering them up, and I kind of put together 11 of them that felt like that they kind of spoke to each other a bit, and that sort of hit on the same kind of fascinations and the same kind of areas, and a lot of it was these kind of lonely people up in the hills, and sort of thwarted love, and some happy endings too, I guess.
I suppose, Kevin, you live in South County Sligo, and there are references to there, and there's references to a lot of the places geographically around there. And originally, I suppose our plan for Ennis even was to record some site-specific locations around that are mentioned in the book. And I know Laura's piece then kind of is responding to the imagery of the book. But I was curious when I was reading it to know, I suppose, that you as an author live where you live. And I am from a rural place originally, and some of the language you use, I wanted to ask about that word actually, mullucker. Is that what is a mullucker?
A mullucker. A mullucker means a kind of a rough enough old character. It's used to describe women working in a cafe, shockingly. I was told at an event, and this is very significant, that the word mullucker, which is used in Limerick, where I grew up, in just that sense, that I'm told there's a village somewhere in Clare called Mullock, right? Now, I'm sure there's someone watching who'll be able to fill us in, and people from there were called Mullockers, and they were considered a rough enough old crowd. So hopefully someone watching can confirm or deny this. Like, it's strange, Ireland is such a a small island, but the language changes a great deal within short distances. And like I read that story, Coast of Leitrim, where that word features up here in Carrick and Shannon, I think a couple of years ago, and a few people afterwards were saying, what's a mulliker? You know,
Yeah.
we've never heard of those up here. So I had to go through my big thing. Well, there's this place down in Clare. And they were up in crowd.
Yeah, because in the story you kind of get what's inferred from it, but I hadn't come
Yeah.
across it, and I thought, what a great! I love all of those words, you know, that can kind of sound visceral, I suppose, and they evoke something. But I thought I must ask you about
I
that.
think that's a good way of putting it. A lot of the time with dialect or with idiom, you know, once you get the sense, what's inferred by it, that's kind of all that matters really, and you go along with it. Then I often think of that when I'm watching something like, if I'm watching something like The Wire, you know, which has Baltimore street slang, and you won't get it word for word, but you'll get the sense. And it makes you feel like a kind of an insider then to the world when you start to learn it. You feel invested in it as a viewer or as a reader with books where words are thrown at you.
Yeah. Is there in the collection, Kevin, I suppose I'm thinking about a couple of particular stories, is there meant to be kind of a bit of a creepy feeling in, like, Deer Season and Coast of Leitrim and then St. Catherine of the Fields, say, right? If we take those three, like in the Coast of Leitrim, you know, there's this man, he's watching the waitress in the cafe, he has a crush on her, he's trying to build up this courage to talk to her. And you're kind of going, oh, okay, poor guy, you know. And then it switches into the paragraph where it's like, he knows where she walks, you know, where she lives, and kind of obsessive. And then I suppose maybe less so with the young girl than in Deer Season. She's, you know, positioning herself under the tree and she has her book and she's sort of trying to imagine how she might engage with this man. And kind of when I was reading that, I was going, who is this guy? Like, who is this guy that she's trying to woo, you know, just roaming around the canal? And you kind of thinking in your head, as anyone I think would, you know, should she be sort of sitting under the tree hoping that this man is going to take an interest in her, you know? And I know later on the story then, you know, the father's like, you know, he was in and out of hospital, or you don't fully kind of know like what was going on there. And then there's kind of a bit of a dark twist in Catherine of the Fields too, but you obviously would kind of thread that line a lot anyway in your stories and in your fiction, you know, it's there, this kind of edge, this gritty edge. But thought it was interesting that there is a kind of a tenderness in the stories, and they're about these people who are, like you say, forlorn, but it definitely edges into that terrain then.
Yeah, it's I suppose what I'm trying to do a lot of the time as well is kind of to subvert the reader's expectation about where a story is going, or what's going to happen. So for example, in the Coast of Leitrim, this atmosphere of dread seems to be building up when he's revealed to be much more obsessive as the story goes on, and you think, oh Jesus, where's this going, you know? And I was worried myself as I was writing it. I was thinking, Jesus, this is heading for blood on the walls by the end. And then it kind of, the delightful thing that happens sometimes with a story is it surprises you and it goes off in a different direction, and we start to head it into the glow of romance instead towards the end, but we don't know if it's going to work out. But yeah, I think something a lot of these characters do, and it's something that I do as well, because I didn't grow up in the countryside. I'm a child of the suburbs, you know. I grew up in suburban Limerick, and I always lived in cities until we moved here 13 years ago now. So I kind of mythologize country places in a way, like the Ox Mountains show up in the stories a lot, and I kind of mythologize them, and you know, I don't think my fiction is 100% realism. It very often, one of my stories over the first pages will seem to be in a realist mode, but it kind of tiptoes away into kind of fable, and into kind of just that edge of believability, which I think is a really interesting, really difficult and tricky place to work sometimes as well, because you can fall over the edge of the cliff, but just bringing the reader out to the point where she or he is going, oh, come on, you know, no way. That's a really interesting place to bring the reader, you know. And it's very dodgy because the story can go wrong and you kind of it fails on you. But if you get away with it,
Yeah.
If you bring the reader out to a place where it really seems fetched and stretched, you know, that can be a really kind of that can make it a really memorable reading experience.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. The title of the collection is That Old Country Music, and it's the story that you chose to be made into kind of film piece. And there's another story in the collection that talks about sean-nós
Hmm.
and music. And I suppose just on the title, That Old Country Music, why did you choose that to be the title, and what is the role of music in the work?
Yeah, I guess in a sense the country music that I'm talking about isn't literally music as such. It's more the kind of atmosphere
Mm,
and the kind of ambience of the places and the kind of rhythm of them and the rhythm of life in them. But that then comes kind of more towards the literal sense in a story like St. Catherine of the Fields, which is about a song collector, a guy who's going around collecting old sean-nós songs and finds a very strange one, you know. And again, it's bringing a reader towards a place of kind of, oh, come on, are we going to go with this? But yeah, it's again, as I was kind of gathering the stories together and trying to make the collection cohere, the kind of music, the musical element of it kind of kept coming up again and again. And I do think writing stories is a kind of is an attempt at a musical form in some ways. I think prose fiction is a kind of a lesser musical form. You know, it's a disappointed musical form. All other art forms aspire to the condition of music and don't quite get there. But I always think that a story has its own inherent melody or tune, and you have to try and get your ear into it along the line, sentence by sentence, and just kind of almost let the sound of the story and the rhythm of the story dictate what's going to happen in it.
yeah, interesting. That's cool. That's interesting. Um, on the geography, Kevin, you were saying there about the Ox Mountains and them coming into the work, and I suppose I think place appears a lot in this collection as a response to the people who are in the place, and has its own definite role in creating that kind of atmosphere that you're describing. You have a lovely line, I wrote it down: a place of lakes that lay in greyness to answer their skies. That's from St. Catherine of the Fields. There's something in the nature of these places that seems very, very important, but then is also incredibly kind of passive. And I'm just wondering, for you as a writer, I know you're saying you noticed the whitethorn and that was part of the reason it fell into the work, is the seasonality of it and where you're based. But do you reflect on place specifically when you're thinking about these stories and the setting that they will have?
Well, I mean, your stories kind of follow you around in the world, you know. So I've lived here now for 13 years, and after I'd been here for about 5 or 6 years, because it takes a bit of time to tune into a place. Like most of the stories I started to write were set around the interior northwest, the inland empire, as I call it, the tri-state zone of Roscommon and Leitrim and Sligo, where they all kind of nudge and jostle up against each other. And it's, you know, it's a very important decision in a writer's life. Where are you going to put yourself? Where are you going to base yourself? Because it turns out to be a creative decision as well as a pragmatic decision. And like, we're here because we could afford the house during the Celtic Tiger. You know, South County Sligo wasn't the height of the Celtic Tiger madness. So that's why we're here. But of course, it started to really color the work then and really kind of get into the work.
Mm,
And it's you know, it's very quiet place in lots of ways on the surface at least. And sometimes it seems very, you know, is it giving you enough to prompt your work? But you just have to kind of tune into it again and just kind of listen to it. And there's you know, like everywhere in Ireland, there's no shortage of mad talk to eavesdrop on you. You always get that. And like, one of the great things about Ireland for a story writer as well is that, you know, people offload on you all the time. You know, in normal times, at least, when you're on trains and on planes and just going around the place, people like unload their woes and their travails. I think especially on me. I think I have a very trusting kind of face or something. Like I only have to sit on the Sligo to Dublin train, and within 20 minutes, someone is telling me like the worst of it. You know, what's after going horribly wrong in the last 24 hours. I get that all the time, and it's that's gold, really. You know,
Yeah.
for a story writer, and you store it up, and I make notes. And sometimes I have actually been on the train to Dublin with some complete sort of random nut job sitting opposite me telling me all this stuff, and I've been making notes on my phone underneath the counter going, oh right, yeah, just try to get it. And a couple of times I've even taped it, you know, on kind of voice memos, just because you never make it up at your desk as good as you'll hear it, the real kind of crazy stuff, you know, the really great stuff. So it's a great place to be as a story writer in that regard.
You're so right about that. And I think Irish people, it might be a trait of Irish people, because I have a friend who moved to Europe in the last couple of years, and he was saying that's the main thing he misses, strangers talking to him. And I think in this country, usually people will talk, and, you know, I've had all kinds of very strange, I think I have that too. Is it your face, you look open or trusting or something?
I think I'm a very open looking person, obviously, by all these people. But I was given a reading in Canada a few years ago, and I was talking about where the stories come from. And I said to the crowd, I said, you know, that thing where people come up and just start to unloading on you, and they were going, no, we don't do this at all in Canada, you know. So it is definitely an Irish characteristic, I think.
Yeah. I even found a dog yesterday. I was walking my own dog down in Salt Hill, and I spotted a retriever crossing the road by himself. He looked like a real old one, you know, and he didn't look like he was with anyone, and he kind of had a bit of a limp, you know, and I spotted him and I thought, oh, you know, is he lost or is he not? And he was still kind of rambling by himself on the way back. So I said, I better go over and look, you know. And there was another girl going over towards him just as I made it. And I said, I think he's by himself. And she said, yeah, I've just noticed. And she said, oh, I see a collar. I'll have a look. And the collar said, I live in Salt Hill and I can find my own way home.
Oh, that's fabulous. Yeah, that's great.
You know, and I was just kind of thinking that something, you know, obviously they're sick to death of people calling about this dog, you know, and they just thought, but I think definitely I've understood that more in the last couple of years, I suppose, with fiction, that there's so much that you can put down and pass off as imaginings from your own head. But actually, I think writers are kind of casually stealing things a lot, really.
But then is twisting it and putting a slant in it and turning it a little, and taking two things you find and kind of welding them together and looking for a spark. I often find that the critical moment that tells when a story is going to work or not is if the characters have found their correct stage, you know. If they're in the right place, if they're in the right setting. Often you might have great characters, but they're just not in the right locale, or they're not on the right stage for it, you know. But when they do find where they're supposed to be, you can kind of, there's a kind of a click you hear, and you know the story has every chance of coming together for you.
I know you said that you brought the stories together to be in this collection, and you drew them from stories that you've written since 2012, and I suppose anyone who reads it will see different themes in it. What thematically for you brought these stories together? Like, is it too simple to say they're kind of a meditation on love? Are they not? Are they kind of are they a sideways kind of a view of that?
Yeah, it's kind of I couldn't describe better than the marvelous filmmaker Jane Campion describes it. I found a quote by her, which I used as an epigraph in the book. I've never used an epigraph before, but I found this. I was in America. I was in Texas. I was in this coffee shop trying to do some work, and they had a box where the people could leave books, old books, and you pick one and leave one, and that kind of lovely little kind of loan system. And it was a copy of her screenplay, The Piano, and she had a quote at the start of it, and I'll read it out because I think this is what the stories are about. She wrote, I think the romantic impulse is in all of us, and that sometimes we live it for a short time, but it's not part of a sensible way of living. It's a heroic path, and it generally ends dangerously. I treasure it in the sense that I believe it's a path of great courage. It can also be the path of the foolhardy and the compulsive. And there are many foolhardy and compulsive souls in that old country music and things. So when I found that quote, I thought, yeah, geez, that kind of describes every story in the book, really, and I had to use it.
Definitely. Well, Laura Sheeran has taken that old country music and has done something with it. So we're going to watch that now. But do you want to maybe give an introduction to that story, Kevin?
Yeah, it occurs. I'm going to point about 2 kilometers in that direction as I point in the Curlew Mountains, which are about 250 feet tall, and it's a young lady waiting for her fiance to return. He's gone to Castle Baldwin, which is 5 kilometers that way, to rob the petrol station with a claw hammer. This is always the fallback plan around here. If things are going bad, we could always go and rob the petrol station with a claw hammer up in Castle Baldwin. But no, I've a very happy memory of this story because it wrote itself relatively quickly in a few days last year. And again, it was kind of initially sparked just by the time of the year. It's set in May time with that whitethorn blossom again falling all over the hills.
Well, thank you, Kevin. Thanks for joining us, and thank you for being part of the programme. It's always lovely to chat.
Thanks so much, Danny. It was a pleasure.
Hannah Crean waited in the transit van up in the Curlews. Setanta Brommel had parked so that the van was secreted in the shade of the forestry pines and could not easily be seen from the road. He had taken the dirt bike from the back of the van then and headed down to Castle Baldwin, pissing smoke. His morning's ambition was to rob the petrol station there with a claw hammer. Setanta was her fiancé of these recent times, and despite it all, the word still rolled glamorously to her lips. It was the second Monday of May. She was a little more than 4 months pregnant. The whitethorn blossom was decked over the high fields as if for the staging of a witch's wedding. Already the morning was humid and warm, and snaps of wind cut from the hillsides and sent the blossom everywhere in vague, drifting clouds. Even with the windows shut, her eyes streamed, and she could feel sore pulses in her throat like slow, angry worms. Setanta was 32 years old to her 17, and it was not long at all since he had been her mother's fiancé. That's the way it goes sometimes with close-knit families, he said. Don't even fucking joke about it, she said. Setanta's plan, if it could be held up to the light as such, was to get into the petrol station just after it opened, show the clawhammer, and start roaring out of himself. As she waited on the mountain, Hannah jawed helplessly on her gums and tapped her phone for the time. It showed 7:17 a.m. and then died. Fuckwad, she said, and threw the phone to the dash. Castle Baldwin was a 10-minute scramble away, and he'd been gone for more than twice that. The van had laboured to climb even the low mountains of the Curlews, and she tried not to think deeply about its viability for escape. The drone from the N4 down below was becoming more steady, the morning traffic thickening to a stream. It was difficult to believe that just last night she had laughed with excitement as she took the first baby bump photo for her Insta, and Setanta's needle buzzed jauntily as he tattooed a lizard on his left calf. He told her in a voice scratchy with emotion that he loved her and that their souls were made of the same kind of stuff. She licked his earlobe and showed him the selfie, and he cried in hard, gulpy jags. She did not remark that the lizard looked more like it had frog dimensions, really, nor that the rapid blinking effect had returned to Setanta's left eye. She had asked him to leave the keys of the van, but he would not. When he had a plan worked out, his mouth fixed into a tight, hard rim like a steel toe cap. In truth, she knew well that Setanta Brommel of Fringe Park was not making solid decisions lately. She sneezed and reflexively laid a hand to her belly to reassure the visitor. High slants of sunlight now breached the top of the forestry pines and showed a stretch of scarred hillside rising to Ohana Bog. The gorse on the higher hills was lit from the inside out an electric living yellow. Dead for half a year, the curlews were like some casual miracle reviving. Setanta Brommel said that May always was the number one month of the year for going mad. Passing through the narrow kitchen of her mother's house 4.5 months previously, he had placed a hand to her skinny hip and turned on the cow eyes, and that was enough. Her mother, when she'd been drinking, slept like the dead. By night, it had become the custom that Setanta and Hannah would talk. She would listen to his stories about work. He told her about the man with the huge swastika on his back that Setanta had remodelled into the ancient flag that showed in quadrants the symbols of the 4 proud provinces of Ireland: the red hand, the triple crown, the hawk and dagger, the harp. Better a rawhead than a Nazi, he said. There was a quick, russety shimmer through the yellow gorse as a fox moved for her den. Hannah's lips moved softly at the sight and made a wordless murmuring. Now the birds were going dipshit unseen in the hedges, in the pines. Setanta Brommel owed her mother like 4 grand. His eyes rolled up as if to see the stars when he came. She waited. The transit van smelled like a stale morning mouth. She listened for the growls of the dirt bike climbing the back road, but no sound rose above the birds, above the N4's sea-like drone, above the hot wind in gusty snaps from the hillside. Her hands lay folded loosely across her belly. She tried to do what the lady doctor at the clinic had told her to do in the panic times. She felt out her breaths on an individual basis. You had to get yourself on intimate terms with every breath that passed through your body. You had to listen to each breath as it travelled and smooth out its journey. In the transit she sat and concentrated as well as she could, but still her breaths came short and wildly. Now the sunlight broke fully across the canopy of pines and came starkly through the van. Hannah closed her eyes against it to see dreamy pink fields on the backs of her lids. She clawed at the greasy vinyl of the seat. She listened, and in the gaps between the wind, it was just the birds in conference in the high springtime, excitedly, a vast and unpredictable family. Still on the air, there was not a whisper of Setanta Brommel's dirt bike. He did not drink much. She'd say that for him. He would sit up late while her mother slept. For a long while, they had sat at opposite ends of the L-shaped sofa, as far apart from each other as they could get, which in itself had signalled a situation. He said that particular stretches of ground had for him a lucky vibration. He said the curlews most of all. Once, a prime buck had skittered from the ditch and lurched into the side of the van and dropped stone dead of the shock, and all Setanta had to do was haul it home and hang it to be skinned. These are the type days I get into curlews all the time, he said. He spoke often of fatedness and of meant-to-be's. Then came the 3 a.m. of his soft, slow hand in the kitchen, and it was a case of smoochy and throwing each other up against the walls before anyone knew the fuck what was going on. She pulled down the sun visor for its mirror. She had a face on her like a scorched budgie. She detested her new self. By nature, like a stick, she was taking on weight with the pregnancy. Beneath her breath, she made the words of a Taylor Swift song for distraction, but the song did not take. News headline: there was no sign of Setanta Brommel on no fucking dirt bike. She saw him, with his limbs splayed on the petrol station floor. She heard the ratchetly cruel tightening of the cuffs. Or maybe the Belarusian who worked the morning shift had just hopped the counter and grabbed the hammer and laid Setanta out flat with a single bop to the broadside of the head. The Belarusian was a massive fuck who must have weighed about as much as a cement mixer. Setanta's plan had gaps and weak spots. Hannah Crean climbed from the van and walked from the forestry pines onto the back road. By now, the morning had clouded over, and the vast spread of the white-thorn blossom across the hillsides and the high fields and the ditches made an ominous aura as it moved in the wind. Once, as a child, she had been slapped across the face by her mother for bringing an armful of the blossom into the house. The whitethorn flowers, so much as passing the threshold, was a harbinger of certain death in the family by about the Tuesday of the next week. She had meant it as a gift for her lovely young mother. As she sat on a 5-bar gate up in the Curlew Mountains, the great meanness of the morning descended on her. She hummed a string of 4 or 5 notes against the meanness, not knowing where they came from nor how. The plan was that they would drive through the day in the north to the ferry at Larne for Stranraer, and from there descend through Scotland and the borders. She had watched his lips move as he recited solemnly the steps of it, through Cumbria to Yorkshire and to his cousins in the city of Wakefield. Over the nights, as they conspired, the word Wakefield had taken on the burnish of legend. She saw the city lights spread out. She imagined a child with a North of England accent and a neat little flat in a tower block. She saw herself and Setanta in the bed, eating toast and taking photos of each other. His muscles flexed, her eyelashes fitted, and the toddler gurgling along in pure happiness on the rug on the floor. Setanta Brommel might soften his cough in Wakefield, she believed, and think harder about his decisions and forget all the nonsense with the lizards and the claw hammers. The day was up and about itself. The fields trembled. Catastrophe was a low-slung animal creeping darkly over the ditches across the hills. Her mother had found her one careless morning under the throw on the sofa, topless and asleep in the hot, emotional clutches of Setanta Brommel. That had made it a morning for the annals. Since then, they had slept in 2 sleeping bags zipped together at his King Ink studio. The studio was located over a butcher's shop in Boyle. It reeked of their wild love and animal death. Setanta was 18 months behind on the rent and had a notice to quit, and, lately, this involuntary blinking in the left eye. But desperate times, he said, very often turned out to be disguised opportunities. Wakefield, as a shimmering prospect, was held aloft before her like a priest's chalice. By now, she knew that he would not come back from Castle Baldwin. On the 5-bar gate of a tiny farm high in the Curlew Mountains, she again closed her eyes for the pink fields. She went into a dream. If the moment was never ending, it might not even exist. She felt the presence of something very old and uncaring on the air. An insect's steady keening from the ditch was incessant, like a hopeless prayer, or the workings of his needle. He had tattooed on her inner thigh a swallow in flight. In the black times, make you think of summer, he said. In the black times, she thought, it would take more than a badly drawn swallow aiming for my fucking gash. He was probably in the holding cell at Ballymote already. He was already on first-name terms with every guard in the vicinity. Setanta Bromwell was, and here the words came unbidden, as if from an old ballad recalled, already in chains. The new life within twitched with nervous expectancy, as if it knew already of all the disasters to come. Hannah Crean came to ascend from herself. Above the green fields and the whitethorn blossom moving in the morning wind, above the stone walls and the forestry pines, above the inland sea of the grasses, above the broken drone of the motorway, above all of this, she measured out the stretch of her 17 years. They had been mean and slow-feeling years. She was almost as old as the century and felt it. Her man in jail and a child at the breast. It was all playing out by the chorus and verse. Her legs weak, her step uncertain, feeling lightheaded and frightful, she trailed back to the van and climbed into it. She sucked the last warm dregs from a bottle of water on the dash, but her thirst was not sated. Often, he kept 6-packs of sparkling water from Aldi in back of the van for his digestion, he said, which was, at the best of times, troublesome. She got out and opened the back doors and rooted around among her fiancé's astonishing detritus. She found no water, but she did find the €10 claw hammer from Simon's Brothers Hardware. The scales of the morning fell away. She stood by the side of the van with the claw in her hand. She swung it hard and precisely to extract the eyes from the brute, lying face of Setanta Bromwell, that the sockets might dangle, and his lively tongue loll. She hadn't the strength to climb back in the van. She sat on the ground on the pine kernels and cried for a short while. A few months ago, she had been skin and flint and edges and points. She had been hard, but now she was softened and plush like a lazy old cat. It was foreign to her. She felt slowed and mawkish with it. He had softened her merely with glances, his touch and words. More than softened, she had been opened. On the mountain, time loosened, unspooled. The fields blinked. The gorse whispered. Morning? It must have been coming by now for noon. If she had the legs to carry her, they might take her the 5 miles down to Boyle. But if she did not get past this moment, she would not have to face the next. She looked out across the high fields. Just now, As the cloudbank shifted to let the sun break through, the whitethorn blossom was tipping. The strange vibrancy of its bloom would not tomorrow be so ghostly, nor at the same time so vivid. By tacit agreement with her mountain, the year already was turning. The strongest impulse she had was not towards love, but towards that burning loneliness. And she knew by nature the tunes circle and turn. It's the way the wound wants the knife, wants the wound, wants the knife. Now, she heard, before its sound even broke on the air, the scratch and meek resolve of her mother's corolla. It was neither taxed nor insured. It was taken out only at moments of high emergency. These were not yet so few as her poor mother might have hoped. And yes, here it came, inevitably, around the bend from the back road into the forestry pines, and Hannah felt a volley of tiny kicks within. Lulu Crean was a hollowed woman now. She was like a reed from the drink and the nerves. She stepped from the corolla and came soft-footed and stoically through the gloom of the pine trees to take her daughter in her arms. "Oh, you poor fool," she said. "Oh, you poor sweet fucking fool."